I just want to give a little background on Cavalcade, because I think for many people it occupies a very special place in Coward's work. For, I think, most of us now who look at his work, we tend to think of him being more about drawing room comedy. And I think something like Cavalcade seems to come out of left field in his career. But in fact, as his career was unfolding, it made a lot of sense. And it figured in with a lot of what he was already doing and as he'd been developing in the theater up to that time. He was absolutely at the height of his fame. He had done, just the year before, Private Lives, one of his all-time greatest plays, one of his legendary partnerships with Gertrude Lawrence, which really defined him. But he really wanted to test himself on a massive scale, and he was playing with all kinds of wild ideas of things he could do. And, you know, for those of you who are Downton Abbey fans, this story is nothing new. This was the original Upstairs, Downstairs, in fact, of focusing on these two upper-class and working-class families over the course of 30 years, and British history that everybody knew at that time. But what had prepared him for doing something on this scale was his work in reviews, which a lot of people forget about, because he was also staging his work as well as usually writing the songs and the book and the sketches for the reviews. And a lot of his work up at that time had been very heavily influenced, as many people's was, by the German Expressionist movement, and particularly what had happened in cinema up to that time. And a lot of it was really inspired by that. So, you know, while a lot of the reviews were about having a great time and song and dance numbers and comedy, some of the numbers were very dark and often surrealistic in how they were staged. But Cavalcade was something else again, and when he finally started to work on it, they had to actually set an opening date before he had actually written the play, because he realized he needed the most advanced, biggest stage in London, and originally he'd wanted the Coliseum, which he couldn't get, so they settled on the Drury Lane, which was massive and which had a turntable that they could use, and he knew that they could perform all the scene changes that would be required, covering this massive story. The cast and crew of Cavalcade numbered 400 people. Gives you a clue as to why this show can't be revived today. Something that was fascinating and that's really picked up on in the movie version is that he does something very, very daring, both as a writer and as a director, in telling this story. In the early stages of the story, the earliest years of the story, around the turn of the century, the storytelling is quite realistic and naturalistic. As the story moved forward in time into what he felt was a much more chaotic present, he staged it in a much more surrealistic fashion as the show progressed. And so you ended up in a very different place from where you had begun, which of course was his whole point about how Britain had changed over the 3 decades of his lifetime, and that so many people in his audience had seen. And so this is how he staged the World War I sequence on stage. He just had 2 ramps going in either direction, and these endless lines of troops marching up and across the ramps, crisscrossing. And in the forestage were these 3 young, beautiful musical comedy singers who were singing patriotic songs of the day. And there was an electrical sign that would tell people what year they were in. And so it starts off 1914, and the troops are marching, 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 and the songs are very upbeat and patriotic and happy. And then as people saw the years change to 1915 and 1916 and 1917, the marching becomes slower and more dirge-like. The music gets distorted and twisted. He even devised a special lighting effect with his lighting designer that the beautiful young women on the forestage would appear to age before your eyes with the lighting effect. That was World War I. You would not see stagecraft like that in London for another 30 years, and even then it would be considered avant-garde. And here's Coward doing this in 1931 in a very mainstream entertainment. The film became a spectacular success. In fact, it was the highest-grossing film of its year. Coward has left a record behind of the making of Cavalcade that's incredibly jaundiced, as his view often was of Hollywood, and very negative. He basically felt Cavalcade was one of the few of his plays that had ever been adapted with anything like dignity and responsibility to the original.